This is World History of Christianity, Chapter 5, Part 3, beginning at the top of page 171. In the north, meanwhile, Jesuit missionaries enjoyed their greatest access during the reign of the first Grand Mughal Akbar. Akbar was the grandson of Babur, whose skill had enabled a small Timurid army to conquer Delhi, and son of Humayun, who had managed to restore Mughal hegemony in 1555. While illiterate, Akbar had an acute and inquiring mind. His durbar was open to notables from every community. His palaces were filled with the daughters of nobles and kings, each from a royal family, having a different religion and having a father with whom he forged an astute marriage alliance. With each elite community of whatever faith, he forged a family bond of mutual loyalty symbolized by namak halal, salt faith, so that he became domestically and personally identified with each community's religion. At Fatehpur Sikri, within his spacious new red stone hall of discussion, he took delight in his role as Imam-e-Adil, of being the equitable umpire or supreme arbiter of all debates. Seated at the center of an elevated stone structure, which resembled a huge spoked wheel, with disputants from different persuasions sitting around the rim, each occupying a place at one end of a stone spoke, he could turn to face any discussant. Protagonists facing each other round the rim, initially just Sunnis and Shias, soon included Brahmins and Buddhists, Jains and Christians, along with Kayasthas, Kshatriyas, Khatris, and representatives of many theological perspectives. It was into this maelstrom of disputations that Jesuits were plunged. The presence of Christians in the Mughal Durbar was, for the most part, cultural and diplomatic. It left very little lasting legacy in India. While diplomacy brought missionaries into Mughal cities, or when Mughals were on the march into Mughal encampments, only in the time of Akbar, 1556 through 1605, was there a limited freedom to roam or to spread the Christian message. 3 successive missions came during that reign, with adequate communication occurring only during the third. These began when a garrulous secular priest sent by the Bishop of Cochin managed to arouse the emperor's interest, so that he sent an embassy to Goa requesting 2 learned missionaries and a Persian interpreter. The Jesuits who returned with his ambassador, Rudolph Aquaviva, Antony Montserrat, and Francis Henriquez, failed to evoke more than the Padshah's periodic and quixotic enthusiasm, and found themselves frustrated and disappointed. Mughals and their nobles were interested in European ideas and in the latest developments of science and technology. Clocks and firearms, mathematics and medicine, libraries and telescopes interested them much more than disquisitions which qualified the absolute oneness of God. Only the third mission managed to achieve a moderate influence within the Durbar. This was largely due to the accident of its being headed by someone with enough energy, insight, and perseverance to master a modicum of Persian. Jerome Xavier, the great-nephew of Francis Xavier, managed to have a long conversation with Akbar and to write what he learned in a book which he dedicated to the memory of the Padshah. Akbar, ever cautious, refused to be drawn on his own theological views. He merely reminded Xavier that whereas under previous monarchs none would have dared to affirm the divinity of Christ, they could now do so without being concerned about their personal safety. Armenian Christians came and went freely, occupying places in the Durbar and participating in the great discussions. But beyond diplomatic contacts, Jesuit efforts met with disappointment. Evangelical and Enlightenment impulses. It is clear that after the Portuguese arrival in 1498 and the establishment of the Estado da India, Catholic orders under the Padroado of Goa enjoyed considerable autonomy from either Rome or Lisbon. From monastic and collegial citadels, missionaries went into the countryside, winning converts and expanding clerical domains, often at the expense of ancient Christian communities, gaining whole communities along southern shorelines and establishing a high-profile, learned tradition, only failing to make significant inroads in Mughal India. Events of the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries mark a time of overlapping processes and increasing complexity. While Virumamani Swami was penetrating and leaving a profound impact upon Tamil learning at its highest levels, German evangelical missionaries arrived in Tranquebar in 1706. They also began to set in motion a train of events which, while doing the same thing, did so from a radically different direction. Tamil evangelical Christians soon received land grants from the Rajas of Ramnad, Sivaganga, and Thanjavur for the support of their model schools. The modern epoch, initially marked by the decline of Indo-Islamic and the rise of European power, was one in which what was Christian too often became confused with what was European. Out of the turmoil of the 18th century, an all-embracing British Indian Empire emerged. After the coming of William Carey to Bengal in 1793, transcultural interactions and conversions in India increased. Under the impact of the modern missionary movement, evangelical and Catholic institutions and conversion movements spread until they reached tribal peoples in the remote corners and frontier areas. These events had profound consequences for Hindu and Muslim cultures in the subcontinent. The imperial system was eventually changed by the Indian National Congress, led by Gandhi and Nehru, and the All India Muslim League, led by Jinnah. The politics of protest and the politics of competitive communalism led to the partition of the Raj in 1947, leaving the successor states of India and Pakistan, from which Bangladesh broke in 1971, Burma, Sri Lanka, and Nepal. Thereafter, despite the gradual decline and disappearance of Western missionaries, radical religious movements and remarkable cross-cultural transformations took place within the various Hindu-Muslim environments of the subcontinent. These, in turn, led to the rise of fundamentalisms of many different kinds, some of which have challenged the very existence of Indian Christianity in all its manifold forms. Much of this process, one can perhaps suggest, began in Tranquebar. A remarkable blending of Enlightenment thought and evangelical pietism led to the sending of two young Germans as Europe's first evangelical, non-Catholic or Protestant, missionaries to India. Out of the sufferings of the 30 Years' War came the Pietist movement, sometimes called the Second Reformation, and subsequently the Evangelical or Great Awakening of Britain and America. Moravian Pietists fleeing from persecution, Count Zinzendorf's shelters for refugees at Herrenhut, Professor August Hermann Frank's theologically based educational innovations at Halle University, and private collaborations between pious royal cousins, Queen Anne of England, and King Frederick IV of Denmark. These were but a few components underlying the rise of a new kind of ecumenical volunteerism, which led to the forming of a new international missionary consortium. the formation of the SPCK, Society for Promoting Christian Knowledge. In 1698, of the SPG, Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts, 1702, and of the Royal Danish Mission supported by the SPCK, can be seen as the precursors of the modern missionary movement, which would gradually proliferate and then circle the globe. These agencies carried with them the latest ideas about education and the most advanced form of scientific thinking and technology. They carried new educational methodologies developed at Halle during the previous generation, ideas which were at that very time bringing rapid changes to societies within northern Germany. Francke's dictum that proper belief was biblical belief, that biblical belief without literacy was impossible, and hence that universal literacy and education were, in a very fundamental sense, intrinsic to the Great Commission, was unprecedented. Not only should every human being, child or adult, of whatever age or gender, be able to read the Bible in his or her mother tongue, but Francke also believed every person should have some useful manual skill, a rabbinic idea long held among Jewish communities. For Christians, in short, kindergarten and Kunstkammer, room of wonders, combining library and laboratory with microscopes and telescopes, were essential. The idea of providing basic literacy and practical aspects of mathematics and modern science to all people everywhere in the world had revolutionary implications for any society. To strive for this ideal in Tamil, South India, was profoundly radical. Evangelical or Protestant Christianity gained its first foothold in India when, in July 1706, Bartholomeus Ziegenbalg and Henrik Plutschau landed at Tranquebar, this Danish trading seaport close to rich lands of the Kaveri Delta, which had been leased from Raghunath Nayaka of Thanjavur in 1620, remained largely sheltered from the wars which were then incessantly devastating the country. Previously, while Dutch Reformed chaplains of Jan Company, such as Abraham Rogerius and Philip Baldius, had written about Hindu cultures, and while a tiny Brahmin Christian community had grown up in Jaffna, evangelical efforts had been minimal. Initially, Ziegenbalg and Plutschau encountered hostility. Danish merchants wanted no meddling which might endanger profits. The governor, J.C. Hassius, arrested and harassed the newcomers, even putting Ziegenbalg in Danneborg fortress for 4 months. Despite persecution and many afflictions, however, the missionaries were resourceful enough to survive. Help came in 1709 with the arrival of Johannes Ernest Grundler. University trained as these missionaries were, they began by offering to teach children of resident Europeans. While doing this, they also systematically applied themselves to other tasks, mastering local languages, establishing schools for as many as possible, including a seminary for training Tamil teachers, translating school books, including both scripture and sciences, into Tamil, setting up printing presses with fonts sent from Halle, and perhaps, most significant of all, collecting and studying as many manuscripts as they could find, so that Halle today possesses one of the finest collections of Oriental manuscripts anywhere in the world. As small congregations of Tamil began to be formed, Tamil disciples were trained as catechists, pastors, and teachers. Every convert who showed any ability or willingness to help was given responsibility. As the numbers of trained Tamil teachers and pastors proliferated, plans were made to extend the Halle system to the whole of Tamil country, from Madras to Nagapattinam, and even to Jaffna. To accomplish all this, however, Something had to be done to end the opposition of the Danish East India Company's Tranquebar governor. When Plutchow's journey to Europe in 1711 for this purpose failed, Ziegenbalg himself decided to go and plead for help. His trip was completely successful. He himself was named provost of the Tranquebar mission. The belligerent governor was replaced by an ardent supporter of missionary work. He returned to Tranquebar with Maria Salzman as his wife, and he completed the building of Jerusalem Church, a large and beautiful edifice in the place of the ramshackle structure erected in 1707. But suddenly a nearly mortal blow fell. The extremely narrow-minded new head of the Home Board, Christopher Wendt, sent devastating letters to the missionaries. Ziegenbalg, gifted, emotional, sometimes impetuous, but wholly dedicated, was so deeply wounded that he never recovered. Already in precarious health, he penned a careful and judicious reply with his heart's blood, while his condition deteriorated. He died early in 1719 at the age of 36. New missionaries arriving 4 months later delivered another missive heavy with condemnation. Grundler, Ziegenbalg's close and competent friend, was so overcome that he too succumbed within a few months. These fatalities so shocked the home authorities that Wendt, in due course, was dismissed and his theories abandoned. Abandoned also, however, were memories of the Ziegenbalg dreams and plans with the excitement they had generated. What made Ziegenbalg's work so distinctive was the level and volume of his scholarly accomplishment. In this, his output can be compared with that of Beshi. Extremely gifted in languages, he became a master of Tamil in both its classical and local forms, using comparisons between palm leaf manuscripts in his huge collection and some 300 books to ascertain varieties and idioms. In so doing, he brought learned Tamil closer to ordinary people. He was the first scholar to complete a Tamil translation of the entire New Testament, a work which was printed in Tranquebar in 1715. As early as 1709, his attitude toward Indian peoples and their religions had begun to change, as he became increasingly amazed at the depth and quality of their philosophical insights, learning, and wisdom. His most notable work, Genealogy of the Malabarian Gods, MSS, completed in 1713, which sought to discover what Hindus themselves believed, was not appreciated at home. Franke, writing that missionaries were sent out to extirpate heathenism and not to spread heathenish nonsense in Europe, failed to see its significance, namely that sharing the gospel required gaining a deeper understanding of Hindu culture. Ziegenbalg's other monument was buried for nearly 3 centuries under 20 coats of whitewash over the door of an ancient building in Tranquebar. The Tamil inscription, Dharma Palikudam, or charity school, symbolized the Franke vision, that every human person should be able to read God's word in his or her own tongue. In this, he and Franke were united. On more than one occasion between 1728 and 1731, these new model schools caught the attention of Rajanayakam, a Survekaran or captain of the palace guard at Thanjavur. He and his brother, with fellow soldiers, became instrumental in bringing one of these schools with a prayer house into that kingdom and in obtaining a royal land grant for its support. Aaron, a high-born Velilar, soon to become the first ordained Tamil evangelical minister, also began to serve village congregations in the kingdom. Rajanayakam also became a preacher. By then, The evangelical community in India consisted of 6 Europeans, mainly German Lutheran, dozens of Tamil catechist pastor teachers, and about 1,500 confessing believers, a figure which cannot now be documented. Among the Europeans who succeeded Ziegenbalg, the most outstanding were Benjamin Schultz, 1719, Madras 1727 through 43, and Philip Fabricius, Madras 1740 through 91. Schultz initiated work with Telugus, compiling a dictionary and producing a grammar, collecting manuscripts, and translating the Gospels. Fabricius worked to perfect what Ziegenbalg had begun, completing a Tamil grammar in English, an English-Tamil dictionary, a translation of the entire Old Testament, and a totally revised version of the New Testament, something Vedanayakam Sastri extolled as the gold translation of the immortal Fabricius. Alas, due to fiscal ineptitude, he was to suffer embarrassment and spend his last years in a debtor's prison. The most renowned of all European evangelicals in 18th century India was Christian Frederick Schwartz, 1750 through 98. In the annals of Indian Christian expansion, his name stands beside Xavier Nobili, Beshi, and Ziegenbalg. For 50 years, his Indian disciples moved across South India from Chankabar to Tiruchirappalli, to Thanjavur, to Tirunelveli, and even to Kanyakumari, Cape Comorin, and Travancore. Fluent in Tamil, Telugu, Marathi, Persian, Sanskrit, Portuguese, and European tongues, both modern and classical, renowned as a preacher, schoolmaster, diplomat, negotiator, and statesman, he ended up as protector regent, Rajaguru, and father to Surfoji, Maharaja of Thanjavur. His helpers extended the reach of Tamil Christianity as never before. This they did during a time of almost ceaseless war and human suffering, and in the face of implacable official opposition to Indian Christians and missions from the East India Company, during the time its forces were inexorably extending British rule over much of the subcontinent. Among these disciples, at least 2 are particularly noteworthy: Satyanathan Pillai and Vedanayakam Sastri. Satyanathan Pillai, a high-born Velalar of Thanjavur, who became a convert despite strong family opposition, was Schwartz's most active and energetic assistant. His earliest assignment as pastor to the company's military garrison at Velam, 7 miles from Thanjavur, was augmented after the British forces attacked the city in 1772, destroying the local congregation's place of worship. As Stephen Neal aptly observed, the progress of the church in India was at all times linked to the mobility of Christians, and especially of Christian soldiers in the armies of the company and of the local rulers. Meanwhile, by 1765, the company had established a military garrison town at Palayamkote in Tirunelveli, country far to the south. From there, a Velar Christian sepoy named Savari Muthu Pillai sent word to Schwartz in 1769 and again in 1771 that Tamil Christians had settled in Tirunelveli and that he should send them pastoral help. An affluent Brahmin widow at Palayamkotai, living with an English officer, also wrote to Schwartz, asking him to visit the congregation and begging for baptism. In 1778, after satisfying himself that she was not living in sin, Schwartz came to Palayam Kotai, baptized and christened her Clorinda. Thereafter, Clorinda and a local catechist, occasionally visited by a Velar pastor named Rayapan, cared for the congregation and managed a school in both English and Tamil. When she subsequently provided funds for the construction of a proper building for her prayer school, Schwartz sent Sat Yanathan Pillai to serve as resident pastor and teacher. In 1790, after his ordination in Thanjavur, Satyanathan was formally commissioned as the SPCK's first Tamil missionary and sent back to Tirunelveli. Here, in 1799, Satyanathan commissioned David Sundaranandam, a convert and disciple who came from the lowly Shanar, now known as Nadar, community. Sundaranandam, in turn, led a mass movement in which whole villages became converted. Thousands of Shanars, a people whose hereditary occupation was toddy tapping, turned to the new faith. In so doing, they incurred the wrath of their landlords. Warlords plundered, confined, and tortured Christians, destroying their chapel schools and burning their books. During the years 1799 to 1806, many suffered severe persecution and martyrdom. Thousands lost everything, sometimes being stripped of their clothes and sent into the jungle to die. Their most fiery and radical leader, David Sundaranandam, disappeared and was never found. Movements of mass conversion to Christianity, however, continued to break out through the 19th century, whole villages often turning Christian. Villages of refuge such as Modulur, Megnanapuram, Donavar, Suviseshapuram, and Anandapuram were established to care for those fleeing their homes. The numbers of Christians doubled or even tripled in every decade. Schools proliferated, and self-help voluntary societies were formed to care for widows and orphans, social welfare, and other projects. As colleges and seminaries and hospitals were built, Tirunelveli Christians transformed the entire area in its culture and society. The most renowned of all Schwartz's helpers, however, was to be Venan Ayakam Sastri. Born in Palayam Kotai, he was noticed by Schwartz among the children of the Velar Christian poet Devasahayam Pillai when he was visiting the area in 1785. Seeing the 12-year-old's remarkable gifts, he asked Deva Sahayam to let him take the lad to Thanjavur for training under his own watchful eye. Vedanayakam soon became a master teacher, writer, and headmaster of one of 3 modern schools built by Schwartz. These schools, run by the Rajas of Thanjavur, Shivaganga and Ramnad, became so renowned as models of educational excellence, in which ideals developed by Professor Franke were embodied, that Brahmins strove to get their sons admitted. The company's directors in London provided an annual subsidy so that Indian recruits for administrative positions within the burgeoning Madras Presidency could be trained in them. The mixed English-Tamil curriculum, while using biblical and Christian texts, also conveyed the very latest in developments, principles, and sciences of the Enlightenment, something available nowhere else in India at that time. Maratha Brahmin youths who emerged from these 3 schools soon filled many of the higher-level cadres of the company's governments in South India, occupying civil service positions immediately below the few covenanted posts held by Europeans. The culminating symbol of scholarly and scientific achievement in Thanjavur was the building of the Saraswati Mahal Library within the palace of Maharaja. Within this work, begun by Schwartz himself, the old classmates fulfilled their dreams. Collections of rare manuscripts and books were preserved, and scientific instruments were placed within the Mahal's own room of wonders. Vedanayakam Sastri's main significance, however, lies in his powerful contributions to Tamil literature and especially to Tamil Christian thought. His masterly productions in classical Tamil poetry and his equally masterly constructions in modern Tamil prose, of which he was the creator, remain his most enduring legacy, a monument to inventive artistry. The corpus of this writing is astonishing, not only for its sheer volume, but also for its depth, range, and subtlety. Hardly a subject can be mentioned on which he did not write, and write copiously. His use of the Kuruvanshi genre, drama involving a wandering woman, soothsayer, or fortune-teller, enabled him to convey profound expositions concerning deep and fundamental elements underlying humanity and society in relation to eternity and the everlasting verities. Vedanayakam's Bethlehem Kurvanchi is a presentation of the gospel story in verse, rendered in dramatic song, sung to various well-known Tamil tunes and tempos. Within the frame of this particular art form and well-known local idioms, its characters symbolize essential events or truths. Ultimate union between the Lord, Nathan, as bridegroom, and the church, virgin daughter of Zion, and bride of God, requires the actions of faith foretold, the wife, who is a wandering prophetess, and reason conveyed, the husband. As a bird catcher or fisherman, the believer is under obligation to cast his net and bring birds or fish, mankind, he has caught as gifts to his Lord, King Jesus, Son of God. But he must also confront and defeat evil, personified by the devilish wandering thief. Works such as this, composed in 1800 and revised in 1820 for presentation before Christian congregations, received increasingly wide recognition. Vedanayakam's career culminated with his serving as poet laureate to Servoji, the Maharaja of Thanjavur, with the title Sastri being suffixed to his name when he came into the Durbar. The pathway blazed by Vedanayakam was followed immediately by H.A. Krishna Paley, another Thanjavur Vellalar who became a convert. He spent most of his life teaching in one of the modern schools. Krishna Paley's greatest work, his epic Irakshaniya Vatirikam, is a poetic rendering of Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, set within the context of Tamil culture. It shows how conversion to Christianity could occur without doing violence to the hallowed modes of classical Tamil literature.